While Democrats claim Republicans are banning books because conservatives don't want certain adult content in elementary school and middle school libraries, liberals and Democrats are actually the ones who have been working to censor books and ban them from even being sold to adults. But the brand name free speech activists on the right will only ring the alarm when certain books are banned from Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and stay fearfully silent when it happens to others. You may have heard about one or two books being banned from Amazon, and conservative culture warriors denounce the censorship, but I guarantee you, there is a long list of other books that have been banned over the last 5 years that none of them have ever mentioned because they cower in fear out of concerns that opposing censorship of these certain books may cause some on the left to call them racist and others on the right to call them anti-Semitic. And these are not little-known books by no-name authors. Some of them are from people whose names everyone has heard. I'll get into all the details, but first, subscribe to my channel if you're new here because, as you're about to see, you won't find information and analysis like this anywhere else. If you like hearing about this forbidden information, then you'll love reading my books. So order them in paperback or hardcover from Amazon.com while you can because, as you'll see, there's no guarantee that they'll be available in the future. For decades, the left has worked to get the Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn books banned from schools because they contain the dreaded N-word, which hurts black people's feelings. And To Kill a Mockingbird because it contains racial stereotypes and also contains the little N-word. But when parents don't want adult content on the shelves for their young children to access, then the left cries that it's censorship. In 2018, Amazon banned a children's book called No Dress for Timmy, which is about a boy who refuses to go along with supporting gender bending at his school. But that didn't make any major headlines and was only mentioned in a few small blogs. That was back when most of the brand name conservatives were still afraid to speak out against transgenderism and drag queen story hour because they didn't want to be called homophobic. So only a few YouTubers, myself included, covered this story at the time. As the years went on, however, transgenderism became a major political and cultural issue, and the stigma around opposing the LGBTQ agenda had ended. In 2021, Amazon banned a book titled When Harry Became Sally, which did generate major headlines and got the attention of numerous Republican members of Congress who denounced the censorship, prompting Amazon to break their silence about deleting the book's listing, saying they would now ban any book that equated transgenderism or any LGBTQ identity with mental illness. This same year, 2021, when Joe Biden's administration took over the White House, government officials quietly pressured Amazon to ban certain books critical of vaccines and the COVID-19 response. Internal emails were released years later by Congressman Jim Jordan, but in that case, Amazon surprisingly pushed back, saying that it would be too visible and cause too much publicity for the books and bad press for Amazon, and cited what happened when they banned When Harry Became Sally, which they had just done. And while the brand name activists on Twitter, hosts on Fox News and Newsmax, popular YouTubers, fighting the culture war, and members of Congress denounced Amazon banning When Harry Became Sally and the company's new policy forbidding certain anti-LGBTQ books, they all remained silent about other material Amazon and Barnes & Noble banned. Professor Emeritus Kevin McDonald, a sociologist from California State University, Long Beach, had his magnum opus, a book titled The Culture of Critique, an evolutionary analysis of Jewish involvement in 20th century intellectual and political movements, banned in March of 2019, over 5 years ago now. Another one of his books, titled Cultural Insurrections, Essays on Western Civilization, Jewish Influence, and Anti-Semitism, was banned at the same time. The books, as you could probably tell from their titles, cover a taboo topic, and despite being written by a California State University professor, they have been deemed anti-Semitic by the ADL, and I'm sure Ben Shapiro as well. And so Amazon and Barnes & Noble quietly banned them. It's not that they're out of print or Amazon just decided not to stock them anymore. They are completely banned, and used copies aren't allowed to be listed by anyone who previously bought them either. The entire listings were deleted along with all of the previous reviews. It's as if the books never existed. They had been in stock and sold for years, but as cancel culture kept gaining momentum, the censorship of content shifted from social media platforms to podcasts, and then ultimately to books. But zero mainstream conservatives noticed or spoke out against Professor Kevin McDonald's books being banned out of fear that they would have been accused of supporting anti-Semitism. A Yale-educated man named Jared Taylor, who since 1994 has held his American Renaissance Conference every other year, falsely labeled a white supremacist gathering by the media, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Jewish ADL, where he and other speakers discuss some of the problems multicultural societies face and advocate that white people should demand the same rights and opportunities as other ethnic groups in the United States, and had written books about these issues for years, such as Paved with Good Intentions, The Failure of Race Relations in Contemporary America, which came out in 1992, but his book White Identity, Racial Consciousness in the 21st Century, which came out in 2011, was banned from Amazon and Barnes & Noble in 2019 after being deemed pro-white and too racist, because in it he argues, like Dilbert comic creator Scott Adams, he prefers to live in a white neighborhood and would prefer the United States to maintain its diminishing majority white demographics. Around the same time, Amazon also quietly banned David Duke's autobiography, My Awakening, and his other book titled Jewish Supremacy, which details what he believes is a Jewish supremacist belief system at the core of Jewish culture. It's extremely politically incorrect to accuse members of any ethnic group other than white people of believing that they're superior to others. Admitting that black supremacy exists is called racist. But if someone says that they think some Jewish people believe in their own ethnic superiority, that is even worse. That is anti-Semitism. So his books were banned. And to illustrate just how much times have changed, when David Duke's memoir was first released in 1999, C-SPAN interviewed him in studio for their book TV show to let him talk about it. But now people aren't even allowed to read it. Of course, Amazon would never even think of banning Malcolm X's autobiography, even though he was a black nationalist and separatist who wanted a black-only region of the United States. Black supremacist and black separatist books are allowed on Amazon, with one or two exceptions. There were a few books published by the Nation of Islam, which were banned a few years ago, not for black nationalism or anti-whiteism, because that's always allowed. They were banned because they also contained supposed anti-Semitism. And to be clear, I'm not promoting or endorsing these books or David Duke. I mean, he was in the KKK like 50 years ago, which is a clownish organization. And while he has distanced himself from it for many decades, his book gets banned from Amazon, while former KKK leader Democrat Robert Byrd gets welcomed into the U.S. Senate and eulogized by Joe Biden back in 2010. So only Democrats are allowed to have a checkered past. Those on the right must forever be branded with their past bad decisions, no matter how many decades ago they were made. The theologian Martin Luther, who was responsible for the Protestant Reformation, he famously nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Catholic Church in 1517, challenging them on their authority. He later wrote a book very critical of Jews as well, called On the Jews and Their Lies, which has been in print ever since it was first published in 1543 and in stock on Amazon for years until around 2019, when it too was banned after pressure from Jewish groups. It also looks like Amazon banned a book called Jewish History, Jewish Religion, The Weight of 3,000 Years, which was written by a man named Israel Shehak in 1994, who is not only a Jew, or was since he died in 2001, but he was also a Holocaust survivor who was kept at a concentration camp in Poland, and after World War II, moved to Israel, where he became an organic chemistry professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. But despite being Jewish and a citizen of Israel, he was very critical of Israel's treatment of Palestinians and of ethnocentrism in Judaism. The foreword to his first edition was written by Gore Vidal, and the book was endorsed by Noam Chomsky, Edward Said, and other popular human rights activists. So nobody can lump him in with the likes of David Duke and other supposed white nationalists. But his book too appears to have been deemed too anti-Semitic for Amazon and quietly was deleted. The original listing, that is. It looks like a new listing has slipped through the cracks, and last I checked it was listed, but the original listing from 1994 vanished down the memory hole. And again, when a book goes out of stock or out of print, the listing is not deleted. The listing stays up along with all of the reviews. It's just shown as out of stock. The listing is left up because somebody might eventually list a used copy for sale, and Amazon wants potential customers to still be able to read all of the reviews from previous purchases, even if those reviews were posted 20 years ago. Anyone can list a book for sale critical of Christianity, Catholicism, Mormonism, the Jehovah's Witness cult, not to mention white people and whiteness, but certain books a little too critical of Jews or Judaism or Jewish involvement in political movements and ones that focus on Jewish bankers have quietly vanished. Like one titled A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Midford Goodson, who was the director of the South African Reserve Bank for almost a decade, from 2003 to 2012. That one is still listed on Barnes & Noble's website, but it was banned from Amazon. And again, to be clear, it's not just out of stock, it was banned, and its listing page with all the reviews from previous customers deleted. The French and Spanish translations slipped through the censors last I checked. They were listed because after the pressure groups got the English version banned, they moved on to ban other books. So they didn't notice that a few foreign language versions got listed. But again, none of the free speech culture warriors like Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, Glenn Greenwald, or even Tucker Carlson denounced the censorship of these books. The brand name conservative Twitter personalities and YouTubers who host shows funded or produced by Turning Point USA, The Blaze, The Daily Wire, and PragerU were all silent as well and will never mention these facts because they function as controlled opposition. They don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, and every conservative in media knows the unwritten rules about how not to upset the apple cart, especially after what happened to Candace Owens getting fired from the Daily Wire. All books promoting white nationalism and the alt-right were also banned years ago, and no, I'm not a white nationalist and never had anything to do with the alt-right and think Richard Spencer is a gigantic douchebag, but that doesn't mean that their books should be banned. The White Nationalist Manifesto, New Right versus the Old Right, The Alternative Right by Greg Johnson, which documents the rise and fall of the movement, were all purged in 2019. Another popular one in the genre called A Fair Hearing, the alt-right in the words of its members and leaders, was also banned from both Amazon and Barnes & Noble. None of these books call for any violence or even suggest it, but because they're essentially pro-white, they've been deemed white supremacist material, and the publishers are now forbidden from listing them for sale on the two biggest websites that sell books in the world. Black nationalist books, however, are allowed, like I said, with several rare exceptions published by the Nation of Islam, which were removed for supposed anti-Semitism. Countless books by Black Lives Matter activists and other Black Power advocates argue for Black-only spaces and support racial segregation so that they don't have to deal with white people anymore. And that's just fine. But when people on the alt-right advocated for the same kind of separation for white people, those books got banned. Activist groups are even targeting other lesser-known online book retailers like thriftbooks.com, booksamillion.com, and Better World Books, as well as eBay, pressuring them to ban used copies of such books. And again, to be clear, I'm not endorsing these books, the alt-right, or the idea of creating a white ethno-state in America, which is just a nostalgic pipe dream, an impossible endeavor, and a fantasy held out to those who wish to return to an era that is long since past. Anyone who believes that such a thing is even remotely possible at this point in civilization is either just dreaming or completely delusional. Maintaining predominantly white neighborhoods or communities and schools by resisting coerced or forced integration and mass immigration, that's totally different. But why shouldn't people be able to read what such authors have to say, especially since they're not calling for any kind of violence at all? In fact, they specifically condemn it, arguing that it would only reflect negatively on those who hold their views and ostracize others from listening to them. Most are just expressing their view as white people who are increasingly becoming marginalized and demonized simply for existing and don't want any kind of violent conflicts at all. In 2021, the publisher of the popular Dr. Seuss books pulled 6 different titles from print, including one called If I Ran a Zoo for racially insensitive imagery, meaning stereotypical depictions of Black and Asian characters. The books had been written decades ago, some as far as back as 1937, but times certainly were different back then. And if a publisher doesn't want to print their own book anymore, that's certainly their right. That's not technically a book being banned, but then eBay blocked people from listing used copies of If I Ran a Zoo for sale. That is a ban. That is censorship. At some point, eBay later lifted the ban, and you can find used copies listed for sale now. But the fact that they were even banned in the first place is beyond ridiculous. It's beyond Orwellian. There are no words to describe how creepy and pathetic it is for the world's largest online used marketplace to ban people from listing copies of an old children's book because a couple lunatics in our modern age deemed it offensive. In 2015, I posted a video on my YouTube channel showing me approaching random people on a Southern California boardwalk and asking them if they would sign a petition demanding Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble both stop selling the Bible, ban the Bible, because it promotes homophobia and it's too offensive. Many gladly did. I repeated the same experiment again over 5 years later with the results exactly the same. There's actually a pretty good chance that one or some of my books may be banned from Amazon in the future, so be sure to order them while you can. Available in paperback, now also in hardcover. By the way, they did actually ban my book, Hollywood Propaganda: How TV, Movies, and Music Shape Our Culture, shortly after it came out in 2020. Because the city of Hollywood claimed that I was violating their trademark, which they own, of the famous Hollywood sign, even though my use of the Hollywood sign looking font on the cover was clearly fair use. The trademark is supposed to prevent people from selling posters or miniature versions of the sign itself, but I'm just a guy in my kitchen on a laptop. I don't work for any conservative Inc. corporate conglomerate, and after consulting with my lawyer, I decided that's not a legal battle that I could afford to take on, even if I were to win, because it would cost more money than I made from selling the book, so I decided to just change the cover. Also, in 2016, Apple's iBooks banned one of my books about a certain secret society you're not supposed to talk about because they said it promoted a competitor to their ebook store, because at the very end of the book, I said that if readers like the book, then they should check out my other books, which I mentioned are available in other major ebook stores, including Kindle, Nook, Google Play, and iBooks. But they didn't like that I merely mentioned the ebooks were available on other ebook stores, so they banned the entire book from iBooks. They did restore it after I made a YouTube video about it, but the fact that they even scanned the text and got mad that I mentioned Kindle, their main competitor, is insane. Amazon has engaged in similarly Orwellian behavior. Back in 2009, they remotely deleted copies of George Orwell's 1984 from people's Kindle devices after they discovered that the publisher who listed one of the ebook versions didn't actually own the rights to it. They didn't just remove the listing from Kindle, they remotely deleted copies off people's Kindle tablets. At least they did refund their money, but this is why digital content is so dangerous. If people bought a physical book that was later deemed to be racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, anti-Semitic, or whatever, the only way to get rid of those copies would be for the government to break into people's houses and confiscate them. But with ebooks on your tablet, that can be accomplished remotely with the push of a button. And in the not so distant future, we'll likely see computer hard drives disappear, and the only way to save files will be remotely in a cloud account, which are controlled by big tech corporations which scan the contents of those drives, your Google Dropbox, your iCloud account, whatever, to make sure that there aren't any supposed copyrighted materials being stored in there. And undoubtedly, they will also scan for inappropriate material in the future if they aren't doing so right now. So if you have any documentary films or podcasts that are deemed anti-Semitic, racist, or whatever, they will automatically be detected and removed from your cloud storage account. So order my books in paperback, now also in hard copy. Get them physically in your hands while you can. If you like my in-depth reports like this, like I said, you'll love reading my books. So order The War on Conservatives, The True Story of Fake News, or Hollywood Propaganda: How TV, Movies, and Music Shape Our Culture, in paperback from Amazon.com or hardcover now, or download the ebook if you dare from Kindle, iBooks, Nook, or Google Play. And of course, there's a link to the Amazon listings in the description below, so click it and head on over there and check them out.